Good morning. Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Doing great. And yourself?
I'm good too. Welcome to Rethinking the Future, and we are absolutely delighted to have you. And congratulations on winning the Global Architecture and Design Awards
Appreciate it. Thank
for the project Main View Sarasota. So, to start off, I'd like to get an initial brief of what you had about the project. Just get
Sure.
an
Well,
idea of the brief that was yours.
you know, when we're taking on projects like this, which have a big public aspect, it allows us to kind of showcase certain things that the public typically doesn't see. When you're doing a house or you're doing a private project, it really doesn't have the same influence. So we understand these projects are influential. And what I say in my office to staff is we're building a project of the future today. In many ways, architects are building the future, but you can do that in a certain way. And we try to do it in terms of highlighting sustainability. And we do sustainability, I think, differently than a lot of other firms because we start with conservation. A lot of people talk about, well, we're going to have solar power generation and things like that. We start with how do we not use energy at all? Or how do we do passive systems? And so it's sort of like going back another generation of how they used to do things before we started, the invention of the steam engine and then the internal combustion engine and all these other type of things where you're sort of fighting Mother Nature. So we try to do things with Mother Nature, kind of like they used to do 100 years ago, but we do that today. And then if you decide that you want to, have power in a building, whether it's this project or another project, the goal is to, after you've figured out how to use as little as possible, meaning energy or power, then if you want to have solar panels, say, how do you actually bring that in to the project in the most efficient way? And also just our material palette is very specific to this project. We're in a tropical, subtropical environment in Sarasota, Florida. And so there's certain things that we like to use that can hold up over time. And one of the other big things about our approach to sustainability, and you're talking about kind of one of those concepts that underpin a project, is the most beloved buildings are the most sustainable. Because if you have a project and it's not successful, it can be torn down or put in a landfill. All that embedded energy is wasted. So design matters. So when you are designing something like this that's open to the public, what is the goal of the project? Most people have work and they have home. And so what we try to do is create what we call that third place that people can go to. And when you do a hospitality project like this, it's not just about the people who are renting a room and coming there. What we decided to do is turn it into sort of a development project for a part of downtown Sarasota that's kind of a forgotten part. So it's not only a hotel project, but it's meant to really reinvigorate the neighborhood. And we're doing it in a way where the hotel is available to not only just guests, but also residents, people who are locals. We have designed the building to have a public component to it as well as a hospitality component to it.
So, Jonathan, we've touched upon, briefly touched upon the material palette and the concept behind the project, right? So,
Sure.
what is the design of the project like? I'd like to get a glimpse into the design of Mainview Sarasota.
So the basic idea was that once you put a building on the site, you've taken away the ground plane. So the idea was to bring that back and take that ground plane that, is like, let's call it, the public, when people are walking down the sidewalk, that's what they experience. We put a building there and you've taken that away. So what we did was we took that entire footprint and we brought it as a public aspect to the roof. So you can actually take and bring everyone up to the roof, reclaim that ground plane, but as basically like a sky plaza. And so by having that idea of bringing the public into the building and bringing the public to the roof, now it becomes something that everyone can enjoy, not just, like I said earlier, not just guests. But the concept of the building was to have it be, we're using the idea of a hotel to create a renovation and a reimagining of a certain part of downtown Sarasota that's been a forgotten part of downtown. And you can't do that just by having it be sort of an inward focused project. Most hotels, you go there, they want you to stay in the resort. They don't want you to leave. They don't want you to go around anywhere. And what we've done is we've designed not only the rooftop, but also the lobby, that the lobby is meant to be a companion with the street, and the street is meant to be a companion with the lobby. So when you look at the design of the building, you'll see that not only do we encourage people to come up to the rooftop, but we encourage kind of the street life we encourage, when you're coming in, there's a beautiful covered canopy. Once again, being a subtropical environment, it rains here quite a bit in the summertime especially, so you want to make it inviting. So the whole building is supposed to invite you in, and then the experience of sustainability of a very healthy building is meant to be sort of the minute you arrive to the minute that you leave.
Exactly. Jonathan, I'd also like to get your opinion on the realm of hospitality in architectural world, right? So where is it headed, the architectural landscape in the realm of hospitality?
Yeah, hospitality is got two very strange paths right now. One is kind of the ultra luxury, and you can see that for hospitality, in places like Dubai, in other places that are very high end, where the minute you come there, everything's taken care of, and then you have the kind of intrepid travelers who are traveling all over the place. They're either want very, very kind of safe, clean accommodations at a low price. What's happening though is things are becoming, on both of those realms, things are becoming much more automated. So you come in, you have a smartphone device, and you can kind of check in. You can use that phone to actually unlock your room. So what we're seeing in terms of hospitality, you have kind of a 5-star, 5-diamond experience, 4-star, 4-diamond experience, and working your way down 3-star, 3-diamond experience. And it used to be that the room sizes for a 3-star, 4-star, and potentially part of a 5-star experience were the same, just the back of house and the amount of staff that serviced those stars increased. So let's say for a 3-star experience, you would kind of interact with like 2 or 3 or 3 or 4 people in the hotel. For a 5-star experience, you might have 3 or 4 people who are just dedicated only to you and your experience in the hotel, plus all the other people. Now, with things being automated, you can provide a very high level hospitality experience with less staff. So I think the staffing levels are going to be getting reduced. If you take a look at how they used to make automobiles not all that long ago, there'd be 300 people on assembly line and 3 robots. Now you look at a Tesla plant, right? And there's 300 robots and 3 people, right? So I think that automation of things is happening in everything, including hospitality. So, when you're traveling, it used to be when I would travel not all that long ago, you're going to, at the end of the day, you're leaving, you're going to book your plane flight, you have to go to the desk, you have to check out. Now you just leave. Everything's automated just for leaving, and it's going to get more and more and more and more of that. Sometimes they don't even have to give you a receipt; they just email you the receipt. You just pack up your bags, go get a Uber, and head to the airport, and you don't even have to meet anybody at the hotel to say goodbye. So I think that's getting to be where that in and out experience is going to be less and less. But now the people want the experience of whether it's a spa or dining and having room service. They want that to happen at their beck and call because people have very different schedules. So we're finding on the amenities side, there's no substitute for personal attention. And on the checking in, checking out, booking it, that's all being quite automated. Like even now, it used to be you have to call people to get like your points for staying. If you're at like certain level of like silver or platinum, for whether it's Marriott or some other, now, that all just gets automated. So I think it's an interesting blend of that personal experience that came from the high-end luxury side that's making its way all the way down through, and that experience for everybody, not just people who are at the platinum level or a 4-star, 5-star level.
Exactly. I mean, the more inclusive the projects are, the better they are, right?
Right. So yeah,
So
so I wasn't even thinking about it in terms of inclusivity, but I guess that would be a very good way of kind of everything that I just said, kind of that everyone has certain things available to them. The democratization of it all
it's
is really happening. Yes.
but as long as it's a corporate project, I mean, democratization of it seems really far-fetched.
Right. I don't disagree. But this hotel is a boutique hotel. And so it's run locally, owned locally. And so they do want to take this as a template and start to put it into other markets because they feel like they shouldn't just be exclusive to Sarasota. They like to take this and kind of share it with the world. So there is plans to now take this hotel design and put it into a couple other markets. One that we're talking about right now is actually in Savannah, Georgia.
But Jonathan, what are the primary materials that your team used in the project?
Yes, it's interesting because as you get closer to the project, the material palette changes. So from kind of like the street and from sort of back, kind of like the skyline or the edge to the sky, the building actually has a clad exterior with terracotta. So in this environment where it's bright sunshine, terracotta is an insulating material. So the first idea is to insulate the building, not just put paint and stucco on concrete. So we have a terracotta exterior. As you work your way in, obviously the superstructure is concrete and the infill is glass. And then we use what I call noble materials. So those touch points, as you get closer to the building and the building gets closer to you, we're starting to use natural materials, starting to use wood, stone. And so the building is reacting to the proximity of the guests. And then as you get closer and closer, then eventually you'll see that we have a lot of living walls in the project. We're live planting. We're using plants to actually help cleanse the air inside the building. The parking garage is clad with actually metal screens to provide passive shading. And then we're using those metal screens to allow plants to grow up on to provide more shading and also just to reduce our carbon footprint. So the building, it's not really meant to be, let's call it a living organism, but it's meant to be a platform for those things that enhance sustainability in the most complete way that we can passively. And then after we've checked off all the boxes we can for passive, then we go into active things. For example, it's not a material thing, but we're designing the rooftops to be able to collect all the water. And so not only to use for the living walls, but also just, hold it and then slowly put it into the aquifer. In an area like this, where you get these torrential rains that come down quite quickly, the water just runs off. So we're collecting water on the property and then slowly letting it percolate down into the aquifer, as opposed to just washing off and then going off into Gulf of Mexico. It's not really, your answer about materiality, but what I'm trying to say is everything we're doing has an effect on something else, whether it's material or a system.
Exactly. Now that we've touched upon its effects on system or the material as well, so what are your views about off-site and on-site manufacturing? I've heard from a lot of people, architects have their views about off-site and on-site manufacturing, being in terms of finance, being in terms of environment. What are your personal views about off-site and on-site manufacturing?
So I'm a strong proponent of regionalism, and so that if you're designing something in New Delhi, it should be affected by the local sun angles and climate and wind patterns and temperature swings. If I'm designing something in Sarasota, I think even the aesthetic of the building might look very different. I am critical of certain architecture firms. No matter what they build in the world, it all looks the same. And they have sort of like a brand. And, we never really could afford that. I think even when they started doing that in the 80s, and then it really, became that branding in the 90s and then continues. But, when you have archetypes, or if they're building in a snowy environment or a tropical environment or a desert environment, and all the buildings look the same, I think we've lost the narrative. And the narrative is that a generation or so ago, you built in concert with Mother Nature or just with nature. And we need to get back to that, because we probably realized too late that we can't afford to build that way anymore. It never was sustainable. Even when gas was in the 70s, 50 cents a gallon, we still were building projects for the future. And if you're looking at the future, and not all that far out, there was an energy crisis, and we've had a whole bunch of those, and we only have a certain amount of limited resources. So, I think that what we're trying to do today, and I'm just trying to stay on task with your question about on-site versus not. The more you can build on-site, the more you don't have to do transportation, the more you can do local, whether it's a building, whether it's, the crops that you're making, buying something and shipping it halfway around the world. Amazon wants to do that all day long, and there's a lot of companies like Alibaba that'll do that. But I think that that's a zero-sum game. I think we really have to take a leadership component. And, all those companies are run by older people. I think people who are younger have to realize that sometimes the paradigms shift. People like your age have to take the leadership role and fundamentally change how we think about the world, because if we keep on doing things like we used to, we're going to be continually being in trouble. So, I'm a big proponent of local, of regional. Even when, someone comes in from out of town, I usually say, hire a local architect. They know the codes better than, somebody from out of town. So, I've always been a big proponent of regionalism. And so I hope that gives an underpinning to the answer to my question, to your question.
Exactly, absolutely. Absolutely, it does, Jonathan, and I appreciate such insightful response. So, we briefly touched upon how crucial you consider sustainability in your projects, right? So, how does this project not only meet the environment standards, but also takes it notches higher?
How does it meet them and go higher?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, once again, we push for conservation first. I'm fond of saying the most efficient light bulb is one you don't turn on. It's 100% efficient, right? So, how do we not spend energy to begin with? So, what we did here was we did a lot of daylight harvesting. So, the building itself, the shape of the building, the orientation of the building was all meant to bring in natural daylighting. So, when you go into a room, the first thing that people do when they walk into a hotel room is they turn on the light. Well, with these designs that we have, you can walk in and you have natural daylighting into all the spaces, including the smaller spaces like the bathrooms. So we not only have natural daylighting into the room, but then we move light horizontally inside the room to spaces that typically don't have light. So once again, the most efficient light bulb is when you don't turn on. It's 100% efficient. And then if we're going to use material, we want to do it cleverly. So for example, up on the pool deck, people, Florida's pretty sunny and not everybody wants to be in the sun all the time. So if you're going to take material and build a shade canopy, how do you do that in a clever way? So for example, my wife, she's a redhead, so she doesn't like to be in the sun at all. And so when I think about shading, especially in a place like Florida where it's sunny all the time, it's really important for certain people to have shading. So if we're going to build that canopy, what we did was we actually built the canopy out of solar panels. So not only is it doing something, it's producing energy for the building, but it's also permanently shading the spaces underneath. And then when it permanently shades the spaces underneath, it actually then takes the heat load off the building. So you get multiple things if you do it in a smart way. You get the energy that was going to hit the building, then you have to have energy, remove that with air conditioning and things like that. So if you're actually taking and shading the building, that heat load comes off. So the air conditioning load and the size of the units can be reduced. And then the solar panels themselves are producing power. And then the shade underneath creates a micro environment. So, these are the things we have to do. Like I say, let's build the building of the future today. And so that's just one example that we've done here in this, but also having operable windows, looking at prevailing, weather patterns in terms of, where the wind comes from in different times of year. In Sarasota, our weather pattern changes from winter to summer. And so we get the trade winds in the summertime and then just normal winds that are affected by the jet stream. So we designed the building so that it takes advantage of just natural breezes so that you don't have to, once again, turn on a fan. If you turn on a fan above you because there's no breezes, you're using energy. So the last thing I'll put a fan there, but the last thing I want you to do is turn it on. Just like, the most efficient light bulb is one that's not turned on. The most efficient fan is one you don't need. So having natural, daylighting, natural ventilation, all those things working with Mother Nature. And, it sounds simple, but it's strange because it's very hard to do in an authentic way. And it's extremely hard to get a developer who's never built this way before to embrace this type of design. And once again, this is sort of like, we're building the future and we have to do it much smarter than we've done for the last 100 years. But you have to start a journey at some point, right? So
Exactly. I mean, that is our responsibility. And if not for the people who've done in the past, but the people who are currently pursuing architecture, it is one of the grassroots level things that they genuinely need to do.
there was a discussion I was having with Catherine, and I think you were talking about with her about like, our, platforms important to get sort of, I hope you're going to ask that question because I've been thinking about that a lot.
I would certainly. So, Jonathan, moving ahead, I'd also like to, know about the development process of the project and, also what were the phases involved in it.
So, I mean, from the concept phase to finish, is that
Yeah,
what you mean?
exactly. From concept phase to tender phase to execution phase. Yeah.
Yeah, so right now, what we find is we are being interviewed to do a project. We take that extra step to really talk to the client about doing projects in a different way. And when a client has never done that before, you actually have to take the time to educate them a little bit. So we try to show clients some case studies of projects so they don't feel like if we're promoting something that's unusual to them, it might just be unusual to them. It's not unusual that, and, that people are giving people a comfort level with, pushing to do, let's call it a different type of design. Our process is to, do a pull from the client with a series of interviews, what the goals of the project are, and then embed that into sort of a bigger idea of what is the project about. I say to my staff, what we try to do is an architecture of ideas. What's the idea behind the project? And that way, that helps keep the narrative going all the way from beginning to end. What are we trying to accomplish here? What's the idea behind the project? And then you can have all the decisions that have to be made, and do they sort into those categories that help enhance the ideas that you put forth with the owner or the developer for the project. Once we have that underpinnings, then we start to design, and once again, we're trying to do as efficient building as possible. I'm always trying to, if somebody says, let's do a 15-story building, can we do a 12-story building instead? Once again, satisfy everything by doing something smaller, more efficient, but still have the client meet their goals. We tend to then go through bringing a team together, engineering, in particular, civil engineering, structural engineering. And in Florida, because of hurricanes, so it's really there's a lot of math that goes into resisting hurricanes, kind of like how people are in an earthquake area. So it's the science of building in many ways. You can't just do pretty because you don't want the building to not survive a hurricane. So there's all the level of that, and then there's the building code. And in the end, we tend to then constantly, from the schematic design to the design development to the construction documents, we consider all those phases to be design phases, even the construction documents, even how you're designing the details of the building. Once the building is finally drawn, there's the permitting process. You might have to respond to some comments. Then finally, you're into construction. And usually a project like this would take about 2 years to build. And we try to minimize waste. So when we draw a building like this, we put it on a module of construction so that, for example, in Florida, we use a lot of concrete block and they use the concrete. So we put that on a module of either 8 inches, 24 inches, or 4 feet or 8 feet. So that there's a lot less waste going into dumpsters that then get taken to a landfill. I tell clients the reason why we do that is so that when you're buying material, you get to use all of it. You're not buying it, having it shipped, then taking some of that material, throwing it in a dumpster, then paying the shipping to take it away to a landfill. If you buy everything and use everything, you've actually made the steps much more efficient. And so we embed into all of our projects sort of things on, construction module to reduce waste. And then during construction, we try to encourage people to sort their trash in a particular way that, meets LEED requirements. So plastics are in one thing and concrete's in another and wood's in another, and then trash is in another. And we try to take a lot of that and recycle it before it ever goes to a landfill. And then eventually, there's the commissioning of the building. And once the building's up and running, then, you can have guests can come.
All right, exactly. Jonathan, as you put it, the first step of the development process is to give an idea to the clients about the project.
Right.
So how crucial do you consider it is for architects to, have that art of persuasion or a clear-cut communication with the clients?
So clients only know so much. When I started my career many, many years ago, I would always put something experimental into the building, and I just kind of conveniently forgot to tell the client. So sometimes in your career, you have to think about these projects that, you're not trying to hide anything from a client, but also it's important to push the field of architecture into the future. And so I would always do something unusual in the building, and sometimes I wouldn't talk to the owner about it. So it could be a paint system that had low VOC and met all the warranty requirements, so I wanted to try that out. It could be something where you're using an automatic shade system, and in the budget, it's manual, and then you can work with the specification if you have the budget to put a little money aside to make that be automatic. And then now you have an automatic shade system that can come down and track the sun to keep the heat load off the building. So there's always something that you can do as a young person if the client isn't quite understanding what you're doing or doesn't understand that, you can say, let me just do something here, keep it a little quiet. But I've done that my whole career. It's funny because with residential design, the real projects come in a lot faster, and you can use residential, institutional, hospitality, governmental. Each one of those has different things that you can experiment with, and then they can cross-pollinate to the other pieces so that when you're learning something in one genre, it can help make the other one better.
Correct. Also considering the influence of social media, every client picks up or grabs their content from, let's say, Instagram, Tumblr, and other social networking sites, and they just bring onto the table of their architects and designers. This is what I want. So that is where I guess it is really crucial for architects and designers to have that art of persuasion and just to slide their way.
Social media is an interesting, uncontrolled, monster, you could say in some regards. But we
Monster
encourage
in the world.
monster. It's a monster, yeah. So we ask clients, we give homework assignments to clients, and we say, we give a homework assignment, we have to do it too. So let's say you're talking to a client about a hotel, and you say, okay, we want you to explain to us, what the check-in process is like, or maybe what it looks like. And they really can't explain themselves because they didn't go to architecture school or design school. So we'll give a homework assignment, and we'll say, why don't you go get half a dozen images of lobbies that you like at the check-in desk, and then we'll do the same thing, and let's put them on the table and compare. Or we could, do something from Instagram or from other social media and bring it in front of us and get on board quickly with the goals of the project, the aesthetic goals of the project, the sustainable goals of the project, sometimes the monetary goals of the project. It's amazing how people think that sustainability costs money, but how we approach things, doing things in a passive way, meaning working with Mother Nature, it actually doesn't cost anything. So people are amazed at how much sustainability we can put into a project for really no budget. It's smart design. We want to, and so you have to educate the client about smart design. And then what happens is, let's say you have a series of overhangs on the south side of the building, and there's a meeting with the contractor, and the contractor says, hey, if you get rid of those overhangs, you're going to save some money. And the owner then knows exactly why the overhangs are there, how much money they're saving them in the future by shading the building. And the owner can say to the contractor, that's the last thing I would take off this building for this reason, and this reason. So having an educated owner is really important. And however you're educating them, whether it be social media, face-to-face, all of it's important, right? It's not one or the other. You have to basically always spend time talking to the client, because there's a lot of clients out there that their last opinion is somebody else's opinion, meaning the last person they talk to, they take their advice. So if you're not the last person that you're talking to the client all the time, and you're not, you got to give them the reasons to stay the course. Otherwise, people hear the contractor say, oh, if you take those canopies off, you'll save $100. Meanwhile, you've shown to the client that having those canopies there over, a couple of years is going to save them $500,000 in energy costs. So educating the client in a great way through whatever means, including social media, whatever platform, can be a really important success to the project, because then you're the designer and the design elements stay throughout and can be then completed. If things start to get diminished from the building, and all those things that you put in, if you didn't sell it well enough and they haven't able to stay, it goes away. And if it doesn't stick into the project, now you're not really designing the project anymore, it's somebody else. So if you want to be a great designer, you have to have the ear of the owner, but more importantly, you have to have the conviction of the client to follow through from beginning to end the vision for the project. Because there's always challenges, right? And at some point, you're going to be annoyed with the client. Sometimes the client's going to be annoyed with you. Sometimes the client's going to be annoyed with the contractor. Contractor's going to be annoyed with the architect and the owner. But if you have good communication, you can get through all those things. If you can't communicate, whether it's through, social media or just having a meeting, then the project will struggle. But if you have good lines of communication and there's a trust that builds up because of that, you can get through any roadblock.
Absolutely, Jonathan. One hand. So, how important do you consider global architecture, design, and media platforms like Rethinking the Future, Arc Daily, and platform of these sorts? Art for architects and design community to not just unite them, but also take their projects to masses and just have masses an idea about what real architecture world is all about.
It's incredibly important. It's getting more and more important because something we touched on earlier, whether it's the, people out in the world and understanding their kind of realm of architecture. If I was to say to you, name, 3 famous architects, right? Most people can name some of them. They could, name like Le Corbusier, or they could name Frank Lloyd Wright, or they could name some contemporary architects. But all in all, the buildings that are held up as being beautiful, like for example, the Sydney Opera House, right?
Yeah,
The
certainly.
Sydney Opera House is probably known worldwide. Jorn Utzon designed it, famous shape, famous everything. Project that was, incredibly over budget, but, the country of Australia came in and they, paid for it, and everybody, said, I think they kind of donated money to get the building completed. But in no way, if you were trying to build that structure sustainable with a sustainable underpinning, could that be built today? So a lot of our icons, a lot of buildings that we're taught are not energy efficient or not sustainable. And so with the platforms that we have today and the publications that we have today and the award ceremonies that we have today, like, for for this project. It's a way of re-educating the general public and also design professionals that there's a new paradigm that we need to move to, that buildings that are beautiful, but also, let's call it sustainable. We need to start thinking about building the future today. And so if you go to architecture school today, there's a beautiful project by Philip Johnson in New Canaan, Connecticut called the Glass House. And basically it's a roof and a floor and it's glass all the way around. Okay. And it's a single pane glass. And it probably costs more money to heat that, and cool that little, no overhangs, right? You have to clean it all the time. It's this little, Frank Lloyd Wright used to tease Philip Johnson that he was constantly putting out little fuel boxes in the rain, and they had to be cleaned all the time. They had to be maintained. And we just can't do that anymore. We have to design things that aren't so dependent on using our natural resources just to basically stay afloat. It's been coming for years. It's the way the future is. And we need to teach everybody in the general public that maybe these buildings that we've loved and revered over the years, yes, let's maintain them and let's still have projects like the Sydney Opera House, but let's do it in a way that actually doesn't burden the next generation for the next years. I'm sure that if you look at a lot of icons of architecture, they're hard to pay for them. And even like, for example, there's an architect, Calatrava, you probably know his work, and those buildings are beautiful, kind of jewel boxes, but I know that almost all the people who have commissioned those struggle with maintaining them because, there's sort of a mindset of, putting a beautiful object out in the rain, but when it rains, what happens? You got leaks, and everything else that happens with those buildings. So, I think we need to have understand that the stewardship of the future for construction starts today.
Exactly, Jonathan. And along the similar lines, I'd like to believe there's a fine line between having an architectural style or signature and, your responsibility is the other thing, being rigid in your approach. We've seen a lot of architects having big egos
Yeah,
and, them being rigid in their approach. You visit to a site, you mean, okay, this is an Oscar Neymar project. Okay, it's a BV Doshi project. There's signature about the projects, right? So how
right.
important is it for modern architects to shrug off that mentality of having that signature and go ahead and produce something really magnificent that not just looks good but also complements the times that we live in?
It is the most valuable thing. Getting away from the branding and, everything looks the same. You look at, for example, a Frank Gehry building in California. It looks like the same one in Bilbao. It looks like the same one in Minnesota. Very different. One's desert climate, one's a coastal environment. The one in Minnesota has snow, but why they all look the same? And that's the ego of the architect saying, I only design one way. So as someone who believes in regionalism, like someone like Renzo Piano, all of his buildings look like they're much more tied to the site, the culture, right? The local environment and the goals of, the community and not just a stylistic exercise. And so, I think the future of architecture, we need to get away from branding. We need to really re-embrace, uh, local, regional, and, but within a global understanding that we're all on this little blue marble floating in space together. And we have to be very careful with how we're dealing with our resources. And if you design a building that can hold up to the environment, it'll be there for many generations. If you're designing something that can only last a couple 20, 30 years, once again it gets torn down, put into the landfill, and that's pretty typical. People see, okay, I'm going to have this building around for 50 years. Meanwhile, go and look at ancient ruins, and some of them are in incredibly good shape and they're made with simple materials and locally, right? So any Greek temple, any Roman temple, Romans invented concrete. Imagine if you took that invention away, and something like that is a regional, the science of building, of inventing that, but all those materials are available worldwide, right? Aluminum is available on all the continents. Wood, noble materials, stone. If you're trying to, build a building out of carbon fiber, well, that's, never going to be sustainable. Right. I mean, that's kind of a localized high-tech thing that's only kind of like a first world solution to first world, not even problems. And people are using resources for something like that then end up being commoditized and stylized. Carbon fiber used to be something that was considered exotic from the space age. Now you can buy a microwave for, it's something for an appliance in a house. You can get a carbon fiber face on it. So all that stuff is not timeless, right? So, those things that are timeless, that are dealing with, decade-long thought process of how to make something work, if not multi-decade long thought process of how to make something work. It's things that are trendy. You look at somebody painting a building a certain color, and it, like buildings from the 1980s that still have those paint jobs. You look at them and say, oh, that's the 80s. They're not timeless, right? So how do we get back to doing timeless design? And I think it's dealing with natural daylighting. That's never really going to change. It's not a stylistic thing, natural daylighting. Making sure that we are protected from the weather. That's never going to change. Humans want to have that shielding to Mother Nature. And because, and then being able to have safe spaces. People won't go to those third places if they're not safe. So making sure that you're designing things that are safe from a kind of cultural standpoint, but also you want something that's robust and it's not going to, fall down in a couple of years. So it's not hard to put all those things together. It's just that people aren't taught to do that anymore, and they're taught to do an ego type project. So I think if we can get back to putting the ego aside, designing something for the future, and it can still be beautiful. I mean, our projects are considered to be incredibly attractive. And we designed some of the most sustainable projects in North America out of my office in Sarasota. Some of our houses are considered to be in the top 3 or 4 or 5 most sustainable houses in North America when I build them. And we take those lessons and we use them into this type of project and the project and this. So we do that cross-pollination that I was talking to you about. I think that's very important to see that there's an opportunity here for another project. But everything is really for us, how are we doing things on a regional basis? And not really, most of our projects don't look the same because they have different clients, different locations, different goals. And so when those projects are all looking the same in different parts of the world, in different decades, then getting back to your point, those are just ego-driven projects that will be considered really not timeless. They'll be considered kind of out of date. In fact, in many ways, if you have an architect who developed a style and they've been doing it for 15 years and they're still doing that style today, it's already out of date before the building's even built. And who wants to be out of date? You don't want to be out of date. I don't want to be out of date. You want to be doing things that are out of date. Always keep on pushing. Stop trying to take the easy path. And I think when you have a style and you're deploying it into every single solution, you've actually let the client down.
So, to wrap up this conversation, I'd like to get your idea, Jonathan, of, rethinking the future in the realm of architecture and design.
Well, I think in terms of rethinking the future, the first point is, let's say you go to a site and there's an existing building there, okay? Does that building have to be torn down? Can we actually renovate that building? Right? People always want to just tear down and build new, but once again, do we have to do that? Can we do an adaptive reuse? There are, structures all over the world, like for example, the TWA terminal up in New York was just repurposed as a luxury hotel. For years, it was kind of abandoned, could have been torn down, but then again, all that energy and effort to make that building. So for a fraction of the energy and a fraction of the materials, it is reimagined for a whole nother life, right? So I think the first thing to think about when you walk up to a project site is, if there's an existing structure, is can we save it? And people don't do that anymore. We think that that's incredibly important. And then if you are going to do a new building, what's the best way to do it? And what's for not only the next 2 years, but the next 22 years or the next 100 years? For example, people are building parking garages all over the world, right? Well, if you have this new kind of potential of, self-driving cars, well, cars don't need to park anymore, right? They just keep on moving around. You call an Uber, it shows up, and then it charges itself after it's done with you, and then it goes and picks somebody else up, and it charges itself. So what's going to happen to all those parking garages? Who's thinking about that? Right. And then, we built office buildings for years. And then with social, like Zoom or other type of ways of communicate, people started working from home. So all of a sudden you have lower occupancies in buildings that were sought after and more built. So I think part of it is like, where are we heading and how are we able to do that in a smart way? So I think the future of architecture is to stop and think first before you build. And then once you've thought about what you're building, how do you do it in the best way?
Absolutely, Jonathan. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of Rethinking the Future family on such a spectacular project and for sparing your time for this very insightful interview. We are absolutely chuffed having you with us, and we certainly look forward to have you some other time as well with some of your other projects.
Appreciate that. And it's been a pleasure to be involved with this and your group. And we thank you so much. And I hope that I answered all your questions.
You certainly did.
I tried to do it to the best of my ability. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from you again. Goodbye.
Take care. Okay. Bye-bye.